Welcome everyone to our, another session, our second at Harvard for the semester of the joint Brown Harvard. Third. Second at Harvard. Oh, third. Third at Harvard, sorry. We had a wonderful session 2 weeks ago about gender quotas, and then earlier this semester we had a panel on the transition in Bangladesh, and so both were well attended and pretty exciting research. And today we have our third installment from Rithika Kumar, who is an assistant professor at Rice University. Her research sort of focuses on the intersection of gender, urbanization, and politics, and she focuses primarily on India. And she received her PhD in political science from the University of Pennsylvania. And today she'll be presenting a paper called Left Behind or Left Ahead, Male Migration and Female Political Engagement in India. And I will confess that I think I've seen Rithika present a shorter version of this, but I loved it then, and I'm looking forward to seeing the full version now. And then afterwards, we'll have comments from Gemma, who is an assistant professor at Brown University, does excellent work on criminal organizations, migration, and also some work on the environment in South Asia as well. So we're really looking forward to her comments. And yeah, Ashu and I are really excited to welcome you, Rithika.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Fayeed, and thanks, Ashu, for this invitation. I think I'm pretty excited to be here to present this. I have to confess, I haven't actually presented this to a South Asia only audience, so it's going to be very interesting to see what insights come out of it. And just as like some kind of background, this is like my dissertation turned now book project. So even comments on, framing it and like theoretically and like also taking it forward, like all of that would be super helpful at this point. So yeah, with that, let's begin. I think you might need to click on it. Yeah.
That's great. Sorry about that.
No worries.
There you go.
Okay. Awesome. So about 10% of the global population obviously global population consists of internal migrants, right? So that's migrants who are, migrating within national borders. And this really, so it was down.
Down.
Oh my God,
go.
yeah, you got me. And this really, international migration really pales in comparison to this magnitude of internal migration. And some estimates say about 2% of the world population is international migration, right? So huge difference. And an important feature of internal migration, which I'm going to be talking a lot about today, and if I say migration, in this case, I'm talking about internal migration, it's dominated by migration for economic reasons. And one of the key features of this form of migration is that it's fairly temporary. So people are kind of going back and forth, and you'll get a sense of that as I go ahead. And a key feature of migration of this kind is that it's heavily male dominated, not just in the Indian context, but like world over. And what that essentially means, given the sheer magnitude of this phenomenon, is that you have communities that are literally just emptied out of men, and they're leaving behind their like wives and families for many months at a time. So, and that's precisely kind of what I saw in migrant-sending communities in India. A lot of my in-person fieldwork was done in Bihar. So I saw women in like tempos, which, this audience knows what tempos are. So they were like at marketplaces, taking vans and like tempos to like, the nearby town. I also interestingly saw them at like government institutions. And on the right-hand side, it's actually a government office where you can see this woman has come with her like 2 children. And talking to a lot of them, it did look like many of them had, migrant husbands when they were out and about in these spaces. And this was particularly striking. And, this audience, I don't really have to hammer why it's too striking, but I'm going to go ahead and do that, is because the presence of women in these contexts is fairly limited. In fact, talking to a lot of these, women, it also, like it came about that even something like grocery shopping is considered to be a male domain, which is why seeing them out and about was striking. Women's labor force participation, as we know in India, has been declining. There's also been persistent gender gaps in political empowerment and engagement. And even at the top levels in the national parliament, you only have 14% of women And consistently men kind of outperform women on like multiple um, measures of like non-electoral participation. And but still, you have these women like coming out and participating in the public sphere, in like engaging in politics in their husband's absence, all of which kind of led me to the main question in this project, which is how does male migration influence the political lives of women in migrant-sending communities? And the argument that I'm going to make is that male migration creates this temporary absence of men that eases restrictions on women and kind of leads the way for their political engagement and empowerment by enabling access to the social sphere. So I know that there's like a lot of jargon here, and I'm actually going to unpack each of these pieces. And I think this quote really encapsulates the main point that I'm trying to make here. So this is a conversation on an interview I had with a woman with a migrant husband, and I'm talking to her, and she says, I was returning home the other day after grocery shopping, and I saw a road being built in the other ward, right? So not her own neighborhood, but another ward. And she looks at me and she says, you came here and you saw that the approach to my road was a mess. The approach to my house was a mess. So she then, has this information, and what does she do? She goes to her local representative and says, hey, why don't I have good roads? And, says that my own village has poor connectivity. We deserve better. So here you have this woman taking this information that she, has access to because of the fact that she's been going out to do this like grocery shopping, and utilizing that information to then go and engage with her elected representatives. So that's kind of, the main point that I'm trying to make. And today I'm going to be presenting like a theory that brings together concepts of migration, male absence, and female political engagement. And it's obviously that within the context of India, and I'm going to draw on like multiple data sources to make my argument. And I'll specifically be honing in on like 3 findings. Yeah, so there's a lot of existing work on, within political science on migration. A lot of it is focused on international migration. And it does seem to suggest that, that perhaps migration dampens collective action amongst those who are left behind. With respect to internal migration, there's like growing body of work that has looked at it even within the Indian context, but mostly focused on receiving regions of migrants. So the sending communities in terms of internal migration seem to be a little understudied. And there seems to be a kind of lack of a gender lens on this phenomena, on the politics of migrant sending communities. And that's where this project like fits in. More so because migration is a gender phenomenon, because like men as I said, at the start, that it's predominantly men who are undertaking this, economic migration. And, we know very little about how that's shaping the lives of these women. There's a lot written, say, in the Latin American context with respect to like sociological, anthropological lenses, but like the politics seem to be, political, measures seem to be understudied. And also at the end of the day, male migration is this form of large-scale temporary absence of men from these villages, like even if it's seasonal. And we know from other studies that large-scale permanent, or indefinite absence of men because of disruptive events like war, genocide, all of that we've seen has ushered in women's, political empowerment, political representation. And most importantly, it's happened because it has been preceded by a disruption in the traditional division of labor, which basically means that women have stepped up in the economic sphere and like earned money, right? So that's been like what has preceded this form of political engagement and empowerment in these contexts. Now, economic migration, we might actually think is not that disruptive, right? There are lots of reasons to think that, because men continue to be like tied to their home communities. They are constantly in touch with their wives, and most importantly, like this traditional division of labor tends to be retained because men are migrating for economic reasons. They're like spending more money, and women are kind of taking care of like, unpaid household labor, farm labor, all of that. So that traditional division of labor tends to, exist. And we might think that, okay, maybe it's not that disruptive. Oops. And what I'm going to say today is that, argue is that migration can, in fact, empower women to be more politically engaged. And I'm going to do that by particularly drawing attention to the role of the household and household members in like shaping this, pathway to political engagement. And we know from, a lot of scholarship that the household is basically key to determining an individual's political engagement. And in the context of India and like other patriarchal contexts, we see that male household members actually gatekeep or like control women's presence beyond the household. And still this like relationship between the household structure, gatekeeping norms, and female political engagement has been understudied. And kind of in this project, what I'm saying is that, male migration is like this disruption to gatekeeping norms within the household, which because it's like removing the key gatekeeper, which is a woman's husband, and it's effectively altering the relationship of this woman between like the private and the public, which in this case, I'm particularly looking at political like spheres, leading to what I'm arguing is a feminization of everyday political engagement. And the way this happens, I suggest, is that it's opening up what I'm calling a social exposure channel, as women are like thrust into the public sphere. And we're going to be, it's through an increase in mobility, it's through the, gaining knowledge and skills. It's by, talking to different actors beyond the household and like access to petty cash to do all of these chores, all of which is kind of enabling their political engagement. And most importantly, I say that this is happening even in the absence of their earning autonomy. So that's kind of the main like theory that I'm, putting forward in this project. So now I'm going to talk about the context and then get into like the analysis. A lot of my in-person, fieldwork was conducted in Bihar, and which is part of this, as you will all know, like this Eastern corridor of like high migration within the Indian context. And this is just some images from my fieldwork. And today I'll be drawing on data from my interviews, also data from a survey experiment of 640 women, which I used to kind of establish how gatekeeping norms are salient in this context. Then I'm going to use data from like my own survey to really describe what this feminization of political engagement looks like. And finally, I'll be also using, analysis conducted on a national level panel data set to talk about not just political engagement, but also tease out some of the mechanisms that might be at play. So yeah, so that's going to be, the data that I'll be like using. So the first, piece of evidence that I'm going to show you is that male gatekeepers restrict women, right? So I'm going to be establishing that this gatekeeping restriction actually exists. And therefore give space for, what happens when men leave. So just to give you a sense of the nature of gatekeeping. So I was talking to one of my respondents in her bedroom, and she says to me, do you see the doorstep there? I usually do not cross that line when my husband is here. And her husband was a non-migrant. So she was telling me that, that's kind of the level of gatekeeping, may be perceived in many ways, perhaps, we can talk about that, but so that's like how, the nature of gatekeeping is in these contexts. And the role of gatekeeping is to uphold these gender bias norms. And oftentimes that implies restricting women's access to the public sphere because you want to uphold these norms. And male members are the ones who, take on the role of gatekeepers. There's obviously other in-laws and mothers-in-law also step in. So because of the dominance of joint families and multiple, women can have multiple gatekeepers. So it could be her husband, it could be her in-laws, her male and her female in-laws, and even teenage sons can sometimes be gatekeepers, right? So what I did was I conducted a survey experiment, like an in-person survey experiment, where I wanted to understand women's own perception of gatekeeping, and particularly how they think that these, how they assess that these restrictions and male gatekeepers basically prevent or like restrict their ability to engage in politics. So as part of that, what I did was I presented women with a range of political engagement, activities, which are very, I mean, this is like drawn out of like multiple conversations based on what's usually done there. So the first one was making a voter card. The second was engaging with local leaders and community members to solve the families. There's like a land dispute, so you want to solve that. Then the third one was traveling to a district, traveling to the main town basically for a court hearing on a theft in the household, and contacting an elected representative for a welfare provision, right? So these were the political engagement activities that I showed them. And the treatment here was basically randomly varying the presence of each of these gatekeepers, right? So randomly varying the presence of the husband, of the in-laws, and of the teenage son. So that's the setup. So I think it'll get clear when I read this like sample vignette here. So here I'm, talking, the respondent is basically told this. So she said, I'm going to tell you about a woman in your ward. So it's not about herself, it's about somebody else, her neighbor. And she has a migrant husband. Her son is 16 years old, and her parents-in-law live with her. She has a younger sister-in-law who lives with her. Now imagine that she has finished all her morning chores of like cooking, cleaning, praying, and she has a few free hours that afternoon. And here it's the statement about the property dispute, right? So it would vary based on what political engagement task is there. So here it says the household is having a property dispute and someone has to kind of go to this meeting to solve this dispute. Immediately following this, I asked them this question. I'm like, how will you rank each of these following people in the order of their likelihood of actually conducting this political engagement, activity? And the options are the woman I just told you about, that's the neighbor, her son, other family members, and acquaintance. So just note that here, it doesn't specify the other family members, it's just like other family members, so that it could be the same across, all kinds of treatment scenarios. And I do want to emphasize that there was an option for like, there's always somebody else in the household other than the woman, which is, I mean, at least her like other sister-in-law, and she could always choose the option of an acquaintance. So yeah, I just want to kind of specify that. And here I'm telling you what are the options that each of these, values can take. So I said I randomized the presence of the husband. So he could either be a migrant husband or he could be a husband with a business in the village. So that's non-migrant. Son could either be 8 years old or 16 years old. So 16 years old is kind of when you start going out and you're like, talking to people, mother will send you for multiple things, versus 8 years old. And parents-in-law either have died or they reside with her. And what do I find, right? So, I mean, I find pretty significant like effects on, gatekeeping restrictions. So I'm going to explain that. So what you have here on your left-hand side, right, is this scenario where, so now this is averaging across all political engagement, all treatment scenarios, okay? So here you have on your left-hand side, the situation where the husband is present. In-laws could be anything, died, present, whatever, but this is where the husband is present. And the likelihood of this woman being the one who's going to do the political engagement task, which I told you about, is about 20%. On the right-hand side, you have the situation where the husband is absent, meaning he's a migrant. And that significantly increases the likelihood that this woman is the one who's going to be, she's picked to say it the way it's done. So there's an increase of about like 32 percentage points. But what is more interesting is that I find evidence that, there are some male gatekeepers who are more important than others. So on this side, on the left-hand side, again, you have a situation where all of them are present, right? Husband is present, teenage son, son is 16 years old, in-laws are present, so most restrictive condition. It's about 20% that this woman is the one who's going to be picked. And then what happens on the right-hand side is where the husband is taken out of the picture, meaning the husband is a migrant, but you have the other like, gatekeepers. In-laws are alive and and son is a teenager, right? So, but still you see that when you go from this most restricted condition to this like condition where husband is absent but others are present, there still is a significant like increase in the likelihood of this woman being like picked. And however, on the left-hand side here is the same restrictive condition. Everyone's around. And on the right-hand side, what changes is that in-laws have died. Son is like young, right? So he's 8 years old, but husband is present at home. And there is a slight increase, but it's barely significant. All of which kind of seems to suggest that, yes, there is gatekeeping that occurs and all family members, tend to do that. But some are more important in women's perception than others, and that someone happens to be her husband. So this kind of establishes that gatekeeping, yeah.
The 16-year-old son doesn't replace fully the husband, right?
What do you mean?
In terms of going out and doing the work outside.
Yeah, but
I mean, he does do something, but.
Yeah. Yeah, he might not be the one going and talking to, say, elected member, or like, there are certain things that he might not do, but there is significant amount of gatekeeping that these teenagers can do. Yeah, and women might just like ask their sons to do things. Yeah.
And you won't have in your sample women who are, the husband is gone, the son is 20 years old, 22 years old, that doesn't.
I mean,
16 is 16.
Yeah.
Well, I do think 16 counts for a lot in India.
Yeah.
Both for women and young
Yeah.
women and young men.
Yeah.
But 20, 21, 22 doesn't change the ballgame. I mean, the son then does everything that the husband used to do.
Yeah, it could. I mean, here the main idea was that you don't want to get into like an adult son, or that's why it was carefully like constructed to be 8 and yeah. So it would just be a different thing that we're studying. Yeah.
The in-laws really work.
What do you
The
mean?
male in-laws really do the job, or when they are the only males available?
They will do some stuff. I mean, here what I'm saying is that, even though the males are around, like women will still take up stuff despite the presence of these in-laws. Yeah, so they do some, but like there's still like some amount of lifting of restrictions that happens even in their presence once the husband's gone.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I've kind of established that, gatekeeping exists. And especially when you remove the husband from the picture, there seems to be like something going on where like women are being able to like engage more in politics. And now I'm going to hone in on like what that engagement really looks like, which I'm saying is the feminization of political engagement, right? So I'm kind of defining it as this heightened presence of women in previously male-dominated like public and political spaces, right? So where women are making demands of the state, and this is previously a male-dominated arena. And very, importantly, like I know I've said empowerment like many times, and I think I should like be careful how I use it, is that I am, not suggesting that this is fully empowerment. At the same time, I'm not saying that it's just completely mechanistic. I do say that it's kind of somewhere in between and within the process of empowerment and is a form of autonomy. So that's how I'm like conceptualizing this form of, feminization of political engagement. And there are, different like measures that I look at. And so one of the ways in which I measure this feminization is that I'm saying, it's contact with state actors. So here you have like a quote from an elected rep who says that women are everywhere. If there's a new fund, which is basically a welfare service that's introduced, the government has a program, they come and ask me about it. Then you have making demands on the state for public goods, right? Like that's road and sewage, etc. So women will tell me, this is another elected rep saying, they'll tell me about a road that is being constructed in ward number 8, but they don't seem to realize that, some members have money and they're using their own money to like kind of construct this, and I'm doing what I can. Then you have political discussion. So here is the female respondent telling me that in my family, we make voting decisions together. We are here. If we are here, as in women are here, obviously we're the ones who know what's happening. And this was like a common refrain again and again, we would say that. Because, oftentimes they'll like be shy and be like, no, I do what my husband says. And then be like, actually, like, we know what's happening. They obviously, we will tell them, or like, we like kind of have a discussion together. And I look at contact with state institutions. So here's like a quote from a respondent who's basically trying to get like, an identity card, right? Like the Aadhaar card. And she says that, look, I've gone to so many places to get this card. I went to the main district headquarters. It didn't help me. Then I went to like the nearby town. It did not get done either. I've gone all the way to another town. And this is a woman with like a migrant husband. So just like literal physical contact with state institutions. You had a question.
Are you able to draw a distinction in your data between demand for public goods and demand for private goods?
What do you mean by private goods?
So
like
the latest welfare provisions in India have been defined by development scholars as not provision of public goods, toilets and cooking gas and identity card for a child would be a private good.
I do.
But not roads and schools.
Yeah, so those are like public goods. So when I say, for welfare, that's what I'm saying. Like toilet, Indira Awas and all of that.
So you're including private goods as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a separate way in which I like do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember how I show it here, but yeah, I can make the distinction. Yeah, there's separate.
Because so much of welfare state in India after the rise of Modi is about provision of private goods.
Yeah, like a lot of them, it was about cooking gas cylinder and Awas and toilet. Those were the three things.
Toilets, houses, and Okay.
And civic engagement is like attending village assembly, like meetings and participation and attendance in women's groups. So this is broadly, how I'm looking at these different forms of political engagement in this context, fairly contextually, salient in the place that I'm looking at. Yeah.
So should we think of feminization of this political engagement as being that now each of these places are dominated by women, or just that there's a woman present in these places where they used to not be done before? Like, for example, like, let's just think about the village meeting, right? Like, would you consider like one woman showing up to a village meeting where it's predominantly men as kind of an example of feminization of political engagement? Or is it like you need like there to be a dominant, an equal or a dominant set of women for considered really feminization?
Right. So I'm not necessarily saying that it has to be more women than men in that sense of domination. I think what I'm saying more is like compared to, say, a couple of years ago, or like compared to a situation, like my main comparison here is with non-migrant, women. But like, compared to previously, like there is like relatively more women, which suggests that something's happening. Yeah, particularly if they're coming from certain families. So here, this is just like, an average, I say a probability of, or likelihood of contacting your state about different issues. So basically I asked them a question, like it was like a broad question and like, okay, name what are the issues that you're facing, right? In addition to multiple other things that I asked them. So the more broad-ended like scope for them to mention things. And then I asked them, okay, now that you've mentioned this, whom did you go and talk to about? So that's what this is, right? Like, did you talk to anyone about it? And then they mentioned whom they talked to. So it does. So when you look at, literacy, you see that, okay, women with, who are more literate versus those who are illiterate, like they seem to, the likelihood of talking to or engaging with your state for these issues seems to be higher, but the difference is not that significant. And then you have, when you cut the data by like, okay, are these women employed or unemployed? Really no significant difference. And then when you cut it by like migrant husband or not, there seems to be like a significant difference in that women with migrant husbands are the ones going and talking to them about these issues. And these issues were, a lot of them had sewage, because like that's like a big thing. Like there's a lot of nalas which are sewage, nalas is sewage, and they it was like a huge problem there. So that's something that they mentioned, in addition to, like what Ashu was saying, private goods, etc. So it's a range of things. And this is just to give you a sense of, when you think of these traditional resource drivers, literacy, labor force participation, we usually associate it with like higher participation. But here, what seems to be driving more of these higher participation seems to be who your husband is, right? Which, then I basically show this to like then systematically kind of study it. And here what I find like is basically overwhelmingly that when you have a migrant husband, like across these different measures of participation, women with migrant husbands like are more likely to engage with the state on all of these. This is after including a bunch of controls and things like that. So, I mean, before I get into this, obviously this is a correlational study and has, there are other unobservables that might be at play and like could be driving the results. So it's a good way to kind of establish that there's something happening.
Could you go back to that?
Yeah.
No, I mean,
This one?
No, not the table,
The graph?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here the colored bar is the bar for.
Yes.
Yes, I contacted the state issue.
No,
state about an issue, right?
No, so what it's saying is the colored bar is, say if you're literate, yes, then it will be blue. So where it says literate. Then paid labor, meaning yes, I participate in paid labor, then it's blue. So their percentage or likelihood is about 25, right? Of contacting the state
And
versus
uncolored is showing?
So just if you look at the paid labor, if you're not participating in the
among the paid laborers.
Yeah, whether you're participating or not.
Among the literate who's
right, whether you're literate or not. Then among the migrant husband status, whether migrant husband or not. Yeah.
So clearly the biggest here is migrant.
Right, that seems to be a fault line. Yeah.
And the literacy, this is not statistically significant.
It's not, right? So that's, so it's like
the
P level is 0.14. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yep.
Do you have a sense of why literacy goes actually in the opposite way?
Yes.
Is it that the literacy, if it exists, is very little in any case, so the difference between illiterate and literate is not so big?
Yeah, that could be the reason. And also maybe if you're literate, you're perhaps more, you have more money and maybe you don't need the state that much. So that could also be some, like a possible reason. But I don't think there's much difference here. It's like a binary in like, are you literate or not? And I can't quite remember how. Yeah, I think I asked them whether you can sign or something like that for determining literacy. Yeah.
It seems like 0.27 versus 0.3.
Yeah.
0.27 versus 0.29.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that probably not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going the other way. Whatever. A problem. So yeah, so as I was saying, like there's obviously, it's a correlational study, what I just showed you, correlational analysis. So there's like other possible reasons why we might be seeing what we're seeing, right? So, I mean, in order to kind of improve upon that in the best way possible, what I do is then I use data from a panel, a national level representative panel, which many of you in this room will know. It's the Indian Human Development Study, which is one of the few data sets in India, which has information on men and women and also on migration and other forms of, measures of empowerment and engagement. And that's what I kind of use. And there is like a household roster, which collects information on the migration status at the time of the survey. I wanted to specify that of each individual in the household. And the treatment is the current migration status, right? Whether they're present or not in the household at the time of the survey. And basically what I do is I start with, this pool of, my main focus is this total, right? So which is 23956. Okay, so that's the total or group of women who at the time of the first wave did not have a migrant husband. Okay, so that's like the baseline that I'm starting with in the first wave. So that is, so that's what I'm starting with. And then I'm following them to the second wave, right? So out of this 23956 women, I have 828 women whose husbands were migrants at the time of the second wave. And then the remaining, their husbands were, present at home when the survey was conducted, even in the second wave. So what that effectively gives me is like a treatment group and a control group, which I can set up a two time period difference in difference design. And I also include in my analysis, like individual level fixed effects to deal with some issues. I mean, that at least covers up unobservable fixed, factors that might be at play. Time invariant, factors. So that gives me some leverage. And also this is an analysis I can do at the national level. So
when were the first wave and second wave?
The first wave was 2005-06.
Yeah.
And second was 11-12. and they're collecting the third one now. Yeah. So what I find here, what I've shown you is like results on what I call female autonomy, right? So, I mean, in the paper, I go into depth about that, but I basically talk about female autonomy as autonomy within the household, which is bargaining power, which is how much say you have on a bunch of decisions within the household, and political index, which I construct based on like discussion and also whether they have certain services or have it's a little health related because that's the focus of this survey in many ways. So I am like obviously constrained there. So across these two, measures of autonomy, I find that, having a migrant husband has a positive effect on female autonomy. That's how I'm kind of describing that, which just like lends to the overall, analysis that I've shown you so far about how there's restrictions. And then I'm saying that once you remove men, as in they migrate, that's going to lift restrictions. And it's paving the way for these different forms of political engagement and most importantly, women's autonomy, right? So that's what I've shown you so far. So far you have like restrictions and then you have engagement. And now I'm going to show you kind of what happens or like why that's happening.
Is the index on political engagement the same as what you were using before?
No, it's not. So it's just a function of what's available. So
how far does it go in terms of the engagement? Like, does it include voting? Like,
no, it doesn't. It includes like discussions about voting.
Okay.
So that's what it goes like. Did you discuss politics with your husband? Like that's the question. It doesn't talk about I mean, I myself don't include voting because I mean all women vote in these contexts. It's really not the most significant way in which people engage in politics, and that's something that a lot of scholars have kind of established.
There's a clear establishment of that.
I mean, that's at least growing.
Voting has become a very customary exercise.
Yeah, like at least for women in Bihar. Yeah.
And going to an assembly or going to state office is what differentiates.
It's that kind of sustained contact with the state, which like many people are now saying, that's where we should be looking at these contexts. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk about a little bit, on the mechanisms that might be at play. So as I said earlier, what I'm suggesting is that there's this opening up of a social exposure channel. So here you have, a quote, which basically I'm saying that women have stepped into these roles that were previously filled by men. And here you have like an elected representative who's telling me in their husband's absence, women must become the husband of the family, right? So the word he used was like shohar, which is, husband. So women just become the shohar. That's what he said. So women are kind of literally stepping into these roles. And this is observed by like people around them. So, and I'm kind of looking at it in different ways. So I say that women step into these roles and we're going to likely see, automatically, this could just be mechanistic in that obviously, women have to go out and do stuff like grocery shopping or like multiple other things, right? So you're going to see an increase in mobility. And because their, husbands are going to be sending some money and they have like access to cash is also going to increase, and it's going to enable them to do all of these things. And it has important implications for political engagement because what that entails is that they're having contact with people beyond the household that traditionally they wouldn't, be talking to. And they also learn like local information and skills. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this like last point on what that means for like local information and skills. In my survey, I actually asked women to identify the documents that were required to get a card to obtain subsidized like food grains, and it's just a very common, just getting subsidized food grains in these contexts. Like most households like require a certain card to do that, and many households are actually eligible just given the poverty line.
Just a ration card or something else.
Ration card, yeah. I'm just saying that, for a non-India audience, that's how it was structured. Yeah, it's just a ration card. And I asked them to just tell me what are the documents, and I had like kind of validated it with by talking to like elected representatives on the list of documents. So I mean, on average, people are like mentioning like two like documents like correctly, but you see that you have women with migrant husbands, like it kind of is slightly higher. at the same time, what's interesting is that there's no real significant difference in whether or not they're likely to identify who their chief minister is, be it like a migrant, be it a woman with a migrant husband or a non-migrant husband. So the reason I put this up here is like, it's basically trying to show that, okay, there might be certain skills, there might be certain information they know with respect to actually engaging with the state. But when it comes to like these higher forms of political knowledge, there is some limitation in like how much this migration is doing to those kinds of like political knowledge indicators. So still, just trying to hone in on the point of like exposure.
Identify CM. CM means what here?
Chief Minister, Mukhyamantri, yeah.
And number of documents identified, you're saying, other than
Correct.
ration card, something else also, huh?
No, so in making your ration card, what are the documents you need? Like you need Aadhaar, you need photograph of family, you need like, first page of your bank deposit, like all of that. Yeah. So, yeah, so that's kind of, so what I'm basically saying is that there are limits to how much this is enabling their knowledge and what kind of knowledge they're learning. And very interestingly, like I'm actually finding that, one might think that there might be some like economic channel that might be like taking place here, but I'm not really finding evidence that it's increasing women's labor force participation because they remain to be financially dependent on the household. And also there's no significant difference that I'm finding in terms of change in income. And so it's going on to say that perhaps there's not much that might be taking place with respect to this financial or economic channel. And it's more about like this exposure to the external, outside sphere. So with that, I want to conclude by saying that, the most significant barriers to female political engagement are coming from within the household, and we need to pay attention to that. And male migration creates this form of temporary absence of this gatekeeper in the household and is actually shifting the contours of local political engagement in migrant-sending communities. And unlike other forms of male absence, I'm suggesting that women are engaging in politics like without really, even in the absence of tangible earning autonomy. And broadly, this study like contributes to scholarship on migration and revisits like the role of the household, particularly by taking into account the role of household members and patriarchy, and how that might be creating a pathway for political engagement for women. Thanks.
Great. So thank you so much. And now we'll have discussion comments from Gemma.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to discuss this paper. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I should say I know Rithika from grad school actually, so I've seen a very early.
Surely prejudiced you.
There is corruption. I've seen a very, very early version of this paper, and it's actually a pleasure to see how much it has evolved and changed in the best way. So this is super interesting work, so thanks a lot for inviting me. So let me start just with a one slide summary of the paper, because there were a lot of results that Rithika presented. So let me just give what I think are the main takeaways. This study asks what is the impact of male internal migration on women political participation, and studies it in the context of India. And we have, a combination of pieces of evidence, including qualitative, observational, and experimental work. And in particular, in a survey experiment, we see that women are deemed more likely to engage with the panchayat or with other, parts of the village community when the husband, as opposed to other family members, is absent. And observationally, we see that women participation does increase after the migration of the husband. And the argument advanced in this paper is that this has less to do with the resource constraint, which is something that the literature has argued in the past, and it has more to do with implicit restrictions which are lifted once the husband leaves. Okay. And so let me just start by saying that I think discussion is extremely important. And in fact, I think you actually did you claimed this more in the presentation than in the introduction of the paper, but I think you can make a much larger claims in terms of how prevalent this phenomenon is and, how important this is for everybody outside of South Asia. In the introduction, there is a part in which you say, well, we know stuff about the West, we know that resources matter in the West, but in other contexts, they might matter less. Actually, I think this matters equally for people in the West and every other people, because This is just a figure I took from the migration data portal, and it's just internal migration divided by gender. And as you can see, it's relevant literally in every context in the world. So this is a question we should all care about.
Yeah.
And in Italy that you studied, the migrants from the south to the north that you studied, mostly male or the entire family?
Back in the days, in the 60s and 70s, it was mostly, absolutely mostly male.
Mostly male, and women stayed behind,
in the south.
Stayed back in the south.
Yeah. Today, of course, it's more mixed. Today, everybody migrates.
Today, everybody migrates. But
and even within South Asia, actually, I was looking up some statistics, and there are places like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and even Bangladesh, where there is more female migration. So there is a lot of variation in the prevalence of who is the gender that migrates the most, even today. But so this is super, super important for a lot of different contexts. And I also want to say two contributions with that, which I think can be highlighted a bit more in the introduction of the paper. The first is that studying migration is hard because migrants are never a random sample of the population, and they tend to be different. They tend to be, a bit more educated, a bit more middle income, more adventurous, more open-minded. So all these things are all correlated with attitudes towards women. So it's super hard to study these questions separately from the others. And so I think the use of a multi-method approach in which there is a part experimental with which you establish something, a part observational with which you convince us of something else. I think this is particularly convincing, and you should claim it as a good way to study migration. I also think the paper contributes more broadly to the literature on migration by establishing a new way in which migration can be a mechanism of social mobility. So not only by increasing future income or the future income of the children of migrants, but also by changing the norms within the household. And, from the perspective of the woman that doesn't step out of her bedroom, that she thinks that it's definitely a mechanism. So she must be thinking, please migrate. So this said, the discussion I'm going to do is going to focus mostly on future things, and this is partly informed by the fact that you told me that this paper is at a quite advanced stage, and because I actually think that it's quite convincing that women participation does increase. So I buy that. So now the open question are exactly how does it increase? Exactly how does this political engagement change, and also why? And so for the first question, how does engagement of women change? You propose this concept of the feminization of political engagement, for which women have more autonomy in the public sphere. And you explain that this does not necessarily involve the belief of being entitled to be present in the public sphere. So if we want to use a Marxist term, it's not clear that they develop gender consciousness, like class consciousness. And so this is something that you propose conceptually, but of course you have a bit less data in the current paper. And I think for a future book project or other papers, it would be actually super interesting to collect evidence on whether this is the case. Is it actually the case that women do not develop a gender consciousness, or do they? And in which cases? And so some ideas are, first of all, asking questions about normative perception. So you could do the same experiment, asking not who is more likely to go to the panchayat meeting, but rather who should go to the panchayat meeting, given that, for example, the voting card is for the woman. Another thing you could do is to collect observational outcome capturing feminist beliefs more precisely. You have already something in the paper right now. You could actually have something about female-specific service advocacy in community meeting and within the household. This would be something very precisely capturing, actually this is something I deserve. And also another question which cannot be addressed at the moment, but I think is very informative of what is going on in terms of political change, is how persistent is the change in political engagement after migration ends? Do they continue engaging in politics, or does it stop once the diaspora comes back? Now to the second question, why does female engagement increase? The proposal in this paper is that there is, this removal of an implicit barrier to participation, right? And you rule out the possibility that is the woman income increase that explains the finding, which is convincing. However, of course, there are still alternative stories that cannot be ruled out in this paper and are interesting to consider. One is that there is a change not in women income, but in the overall family income. And this is very likely to happen because of migration. And this could per se triggers a change in political engagement. On this, perhaps you can do something with your data, because you could look at political engagement change within the household. It's possible that everybody else is more engaged if the income increases. Then there is a possibility that there is just an increase in demand for state resources. Your husband migrates, now you need more welfare services. Or you devote more resources to agriculture, now you have a land dispute. So this, could be directly caused by the migration of the husband, and it could be a channel. And then another interesting possibility is that the husband might become more liberal after migrating to a city, and this liberal attitude might reflect back on the behavior of women. So all of those would be interesting alternative stories, and I think in future work you could explore them a bit more. Okay, so I'm asking you to do a lot of new things. Now let me also give you some ideas of what I think I would do to collect data on this and to actually study it. I, of course, realize that running an experiment on migration is expensive and consuming probably longer than the time you have for tenure. And so actually what I'm proposing is that you use a downstream data collection after an already existing experiment. And there are some that I think you could exploit. One is by Suresh Naidu, and it was done just now, which basically creates a subsidy incentive for temporary migration from India to the United Arab Emirates. And this affected thousands of workers and created temporary migration. So you could go back to this community, of course, partnering with the people of this experiment. And try and interview the wives. A more observational thing is this paper by Chand and Clemens from 2015, which is a definitive that uses a policy change, which created higher returns to migrating for Indian Fijians in the setting. And also, if you were interested in changing setting from India to Bangladesh, there is, of course, the very famous Bangladesh experiment by Park and co-authors. And I actually know that they are doing a reassessment of this experiment. So there is already an operation to do a downstream analysis. So this could be actually a good location. I also proposed some...
Can you say more about the last one? Mushfiq is coming next week.
Oh, amazing. I heard from some other people, not from him, that they were doing a downstream reassessment to understand the long-term effects of this experiment. And I would also be interested in knowing what they found. But I think he is part of the...
Yeah, he's not presenting this paper though. He's more interested in, he changed his mind. He was going to do the report on the experiment on the migrants. But now he's doing the cyclone that led to the birth of Bangladesh. He got more interested in that, so he's doing that. But this one establishes what exactly?
So
it goes through long-term effects.
It's a super cool paper. No, it doesn't go in. The paper in Econometrica 2014 is short-term. They pay the bus ticket or they give information to migrants, to temporary migrants during the Monga season. And they tell them, and they see that basically the constraints that they were facing for not migrating, which was the optimal choice, they were actually lifting the family from starvation. The constraint was really this small price that effectively was so risky to invest in that it could have, if they had migrated and then the migration was not successful, so they had not found employment immediately, then they would have risked to send the families to starvation. So if somebody else paid that little cost of the bus ticket,
you're at that level of existence, right? You're at that level of existence.
Yeah, exactly. So by reducing this risk, then it allowed more people to migrate. That was the... Now, of course, he's coming here, so we're not trying to summarize his paper, but I think that's the main thing. And then just briefly some other ideas for existing data that you could use in the current setting or in some other observational setting. I think the DHS contains data which officially are on health, but I think they are political data in the sense that, whether women have information about women-specific health services or whether they ask for women-specific health services, they walk to the clinic. Those are all things that I think have a political dimension. And those are good data that are very geolocalized, so you could use them. There is also data on social audits that give you a lot of detail about how community meetings unfold.
Mhm.
And I think you could use them to do what I said in one of the slides before, which is to basically characterize the type of participation, the type of advocacy. So not only do they go to the meeting, but do they ask for themselves rather than. And also there are papers that have studied in the context of India gender violence, and I think so there is data on this, and I think this would also be an important dimension to consider. I'm gonna say one last thing, and then I have one slide of smaller points about the current paper, which I leave for you, so I don't have to bore everybody else, which is that, as we were saying at the beginning, there is also a lot of female migration. And when you approach the book, I think this is another question that would be super interesting to study. And in particular, the question I would have is, okay, now that are the women that migrate, does this liberalize the attitude of males, or does it create backlash in sending communities? And I'm gonna stop here. Thank you so much.
Perfect. So we'll open up to full Q&A, and this is often kind of a bit more of a discussion. That's the nature of this. So we're happy to take questions, and Rithika can answer, and you know, I think it can help be generative for. But do you want to provide a couple of thoughts just initially on Gemma's comments? Anything to highlight?
I think Gemma, thanks a lot firstly for your comments. I know you've given me a lot of suggestions. That's like very well accepted, because at this point I think this paper hopefully will find a home somewhere at this point. It'll be great to like kind of take this forward. That's the stage I'm at. And there's a couple of things on like the persistence of this effect is something that I have some analysis on it, which seems to suggest that at least when men return home, there's like a null effect on political engagement index and the bargaining power, which might suggest that there could be like persistence in that they're at least not worse off than they were when they were away. So I think I don't make a big deal about it, because I don't think I can back it up very clearly. So yeah, that is something that I want to look at. And also I know you mentioned a couple of things about like the men and how they are, their attitudes are changing. And I think that's one thing that I hope when I do the book, maybe like I do want to get the men's perspective. I think that's definitely like a bit of a lacking. Even when I did my survey, it was all women. So that's, and I think some of the other points might come up, and I'm happy to. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Ashu. Start with you.
I suppose the normative conclusion is not get rid of men. If you
Yeah.
want to increase political engagement of women, send men out to cities.
Yeah, I guess like
that can't be the normative conclusion.
Yeah, I think the point, I think a bigger point could be that there are other ways in which you can, improve political engagement among women. We often just think of these resource-driven explanations, and here is like just talking about restrictions. It doesn't have to be that send men away, but it could just mean that there are ways in which we can tackle these restrictions pretty hard, given these are social norms. So that I think should be the bigger takeaway.
The question, one conceptual point here, which may be helpful, is that you're really not talking about, when people talk about participation, political engagement, they often talk about voting. You're not talking about voting. So you can use the term non-electoral political participation.
Okay, yeah.
Which is fine, which is actually how, incidentally, Sidney Verba and others, when they studied this, they didn't concentrate on voting.
Yeah, it was civic stuff.
They concentrated on, do you go to your congressman, right? Do you write a letter? It's basically based on that. It's not based on voting. That whole literature on political participation, huge, that was so widely noted, I think in the 70s or late 60s or something like that. So you might want to connect with that.
Right. Yeah.
And that is, and then a lot of political participation literature was basically about voting. Clearly, vote is not all there is to political participation. So you can call this non-electoral political participation. And which is, and it's important, you're getting cards, you're getting resources. But also you may have to draw somewhere engage this literature on public provision of private goods or public provision of public goods. right? So the
Yeah.
whole welfare literature that has emerged with the rise of Modi,
Yeah.
the toilets, the cooking gas,
Mm-hmm.
the what is the third thing? Housing,
Yeah.
etc., as opposed to schools and
Roads and
water
yeah.
and water and roads and water.
Yeah.
So and water could be both public and private. I mean, a tap into your
Right.
home, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not simply availability of water for the whole
Mhm.
neighborhood, but
Yeah.
a tap into your home.
Yeah.
So whether that matters,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Whether it's a relevant question, but at least worth asking whether that
Yeah.
matters.
So you mean whether public goods matter over
Whether
private?
whether
So
this
it's like-
participation,
Yeah.
and you did this in the last few years,
Yeah.
when private goods were not available
Mm-hmm.
through the state, could you have imagined women doing the same for roads and schools?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
Right.
isn't that what I mean? Gabby looks at that, right? Like she is looking at claim making for public goods, particularly like roads and street lights. And,
Esther
yeah,
and her partner, not Abhijit, her research partner,
Chattopadhyay.
they have a study of Bengal and Rajasthan.
Gender quotas? No.
Remember, I can tell you what the conclusion was. I don't know which exactly.
Huh.
The conclusion was that when it comes to public goods, women, when elected to, and this is another story that you may have to. I don't know how it's factoring in, but
Right.
but women, there is a quota for women at the local level.
Sure. Yeah.
So they show Chattopadhyay and Duflo.
Yeah.
They show that when women are sarpanches, are heading the panchayat,
Yeah.
then the emphasis is not on roads,
So
emphasis
water.
on water,
water.
and I think
Yeah.
child related, some other stuff, right? So I think maybe
I think it's roads and water.
roads and water. So they do roads and
Yeah,
water.
yeah. Oh, it's water. I mean, I remember.
Water.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
same other things are the same, but I think it was water, child health or education.
Okay.
something like
Yeah.
that. But the
Schools,
roads
maybe.
was
Yeah.
only West Bengal and not in
Okay.
Rajasthan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the Rajasthan one. I know the West Bengal. Yeah.
No, so
Yeah.
the natural question, and not in this paper for the book maybe, would you have noticed these things? It's a very, I think, very legitimate question. I don't know the answer. Would you have? So we know what happens when they are elected to local power, right? That there's enough literature on.
Yeah.
But when welfare meant provision of public goods and not private goods, would you have expected this kind of, and men migrated even then. So holding men migration constant, if you will, but changing what was provided by the state.
Yeah.
Would it have generated the same level of step up in political engagement of women?
Yeah.
In the earlier times.
Yeah, I mean.
So then male migration, the reason it complicates your story then,
Yeah.
and I hope it doesn't, but it's worth looking at. If it's true, then they are stepping forward more now because welfare is about private goods now. And they perhaps did not step forward earlier when the welfare was about, welfare activity of the government was about school building, road building, and provision of water, depending on where you are in the country, but road building and school building would be, right? So is it the male absence which is producing this, or male absence plus provision of public-private goods for the causal story?
Yeah. I mean, I think, at this point, we're all speculating. A couple of points, right? So, firstly, the Chattopadhyay Do Flow paper seems to suggest that representatives, particularly women, are reacting because they're aware that women require these things. And that is possible only because women might be coming in and saying that they might need this. So so I would assume that women have been talking about it with respect to, Gabby's work, where she particularly looks at claim making with respect to things like streetlights, roads, water, all of that. She finds that men obviously make claims at a higher rate than women, which is not surprising, but women are making claims about these things, and a significant proportion of women who do that. So all of that seems to suggest that, you know, even in the absence of migration, like women are stepping forward and coming to my own, like, you know, paper and whatever data I've collected. I think I was saying at some point that women identify these things. Sewage, nala is a big issue. They, you know, want street lights. Like that's something that they identify.
So that's all public goods.
Yeah, those are public goods.
Are almost pure public goods.
Yeah. So they're coming, I mean, they identify it, they're coming forward to do that. Maybe I should show a split like based on.
If you can. Right?
Yeah.
And so when they approach, just to add one more thing, and then
Sure.
I'm glad you're going in this direction, answering this question. They also, when they step out and go to the state, the representative they're meeting is a woman or a man.
Yeah.
If the sarpanch is a woman, right?
Yeah.
And Bihar has 1/3 or 1/2.
It's 50%. 50%.
50%.
Yeah. Is
yes. So some states have, because this is left to the states.
Yeah.
Some states are 1/3.
Yeah.
And some have half.
Right.
So half of the representatives on the local level are women.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to, I mean, Varun would have shown some of it, but like also how much are women doing? But I mean, that's a different.
Varun's finding is because the constituency is not permanently reserved. The constituencies which have women reservations keep circulating.
Sure. Yeah.
So right, so that you don't have you don't necessarily have a woman to go to. You'll have to go to a man, right? However, I don't know whether your data has this. Whether when you're just examining this, was that constituency or were half of those constituencies or 2/3 of those constituencies reserved for women?
So there's, unfortunately, I don't have a slide. It was in the paper. So that's actually something I'm exploring going forward, where I just like took the bunch of villages that I looked at, about 150 villages, and I just added a column with whether or not it was reserved for women or what kind of reservation was there. And I find that I also have in my data, particularly, I asked them to list the people that they contacted.
Right.
So I asked them Mukhya, I asked them what sadasya baat ki, whatever, like list, you know, whoever you spoke to. And I just, you know, wherever they said Mukhya, I like, you know, use that data. And I find that when it's reserved for women, the difference in contact between migrant and non-migrant is like significant, versus when it's like not reserved for women, like there's not much difference. So it could be that it's being driven by these places where women are, kind of, you know, the Mukhyas. I don't know how that's happening. I don't know if the Mukhiya's husbands are the ones who are more effective, or is it that women go? I do know that, you know, through a lot of conversation, that when you have a woman in power, like women citizens go home, they can go to the angan, like the courtyard, and like talk to their like representatives. So that makes it a bit easier. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping I can, you know, go a little bit deeper in like what's happening. I do have that result.
So, so if the result is that if it's a male, it's not reserved for women, then they go less to the local representative.
Yeah.
And when it's reserved, then they go more.
It's more
is
like
it going
the
to create problems
difference.
for you or not for your argument?
It's like the difference between migrant and non-migrant husbands, women with migrant, non-migrant husbands, like the difference might be significant in one versus the other. I don't think I mean, it just adds another dimension, I think, because that's, I don't think it complicates my argument. It still like is maybe just like complicates the theory and like, you know, the mechanism, etc. I think overall it does look like something is happening. It could just be this certain interaction, which is more salient in some contexts. Yeah.
And you said also that most scholars who studied this have studied the impact, not on sending community, but the impact on receiving communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're aware of one study I'm familiar with, Prema Kurian's study of that is not actually, it may be functionally equivalent, but not exactly its migration to the city. Kerala's migration is not taking that form. Kerala's migration is taking migration to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right. So a fourth of the state's GDP is now coming from migrants. It's that high.
Yeah.
And her study is about 3 sending communities.
Okay.
One, and it's qualitative, but it might be very useful for you.
Yeah.
One in which Muslims dominated. One sending village or sending community where Christians dominated, because Christians are in such large numbers in Kerala, and one in which the Hindus dominated. So the three large communities covered. And she was trying to ask if the religion of the sending community makes a difference to how the greater resources available. It's not about political agreement per se. How is that used? And he actually found that the Christians and Hindus were not making religious institutions as much. Muslims were making a lot of fancy mosques.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Now that's also a certain kind of expression.
Yeah.
It's not exactly this.
Sure. Yeah.
But it may be, maybe there's something like this there also. You might want to take a look at it. It's perhaps I used it in my Kerala work. I found it very insightful.
Yeah.
It's probably mid-90s.
Okay.
Prema Kurin, she's a professor of sociology at Syracuse now.
Yeah.
And this work was done at Brown University where I teach.
Okay.
In sociology department.
Yeah. No, when I said not much has been done on sending communities and people have looked at receiving regions, I mean, it's to say with respect to like political engagement and like
not
policy.
Respect to remittance.
Yeah. I mean, right. So I'm saying that a lot of that has been focused on receiving regions. And I was particularly alluding to work by, say, Rikhil Bhavnani and Bethany Dasina and like a lot of work by Tariq Tachil. So that's kind of the work I was talking about. And it's not to discount like the vast sociological and anthropological work that's been done on sending communities, even in India. I mean, the big one is by Sonal Desai, which looks at, left behind women. So I like kind of, cite that a lot. It's more about like the politics of this kind, which we are talking a lot now within the Indian context that I'm particularly interested in, but I'll take a look at this. Yeah.
You have a question?
Yeah.
I am
Yes.
going through Diwali celebration.
Yeah.
Like this, I want to just make sure that I
Yeah.
I grew up in a village, so for that means when my father was away, like for anything, whatever reasons, my household is a completely different setting. My mother is a completely different person when my father is not around. She's the most joyful.
Right.
She has her friends around.
Joyful.
Amazing food. When my father is there, it's not good food, but my father is good.
Oh, wow.
I can completely relate to what you're saying.
Which part of the country?
I grew up in Tirunelveli, but my parents are from Bangalore.
Okay.
I see. So coastal Karnataka.
Yes, but my parents live
You're describing now.
Tirunelveli, Tamil, very small village.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So another thing is that I also have interviewed a lot of village panchayat leaders. One of the village panchayat leaders I clearly remember her name is Devi.
Okay.
And she narrated me a story of how her husband is in Bangalore. So it's a part of the truth.
Right.
Her husband is in Bangalore. So that's why she has more agency.
Yeah.
To deliver her. So many women I met, nobody was as confident as her.
Yeah.
And she is an SC panchayat leader, which means a scheduled caste. That really means that she doesn't have agency in a general sense. But because her husband is away and he's a butcher or something like that, so he's away, she has so much agency. And she said I do not want to be treated, inferior by the upper caste people.
Right.
So I want to make sure that my people are more empowered.
Yeah.
So I deliver duty. So I think that is one. I think female sarpanchas or the political whatever leaders, if what happens when migration of their husbands happen. And I also feel that if your husband, and I also met one more woman whose husband was working and coming back and things like that. And she also has much more agency than husbands who are inside the village and doing things inside the village. And I think
Is it the agency is used for children or agency used for your own self, or what is the newfound agency used for?
No, I feel
in your materials. Yeah.
No, I feel when I am a political leader, like a village sarpanch, I'm only saying if there is a migration that's happening, if the husband lives far away, you have much more agency in terms of because you have to do things.
Yeah.
You have like the way you are saying, like.
So you're not talking about a regular citizen, you're talking about an elected representative.
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about my
her own experience at home.
Having a mother and my father works in the village. It's not that he's away in the village, but he also because he's from Karnataka, so he goes to his own family, come back, which my mother is not allowed to. She's not allowed to do his to
Right.
take care of her parents. So
Yeah.
when my father goes away, the household turns into a different setting,
Mm.
which I feel is the setting of all the women
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah.
Because her husbands are away and she has
Right.
to take care of and
Everything.
they're
Yeah.
the most, I feel like because you are allowed to be your own self,
Yeah.
when your husband is around, when your teenage son is around, you're
Yeah.
not allowed to be your
Yeah.
full
I mean,
self.
it could be just even self-policing, right? Like it's
Yes.
not even that
Yeah.
husband is telling you not to go. It's a lot if
Exactly.
it is internalized norms. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's very interesting. It brings back a lot of my own memories of
Yeah,
and things like
yeah, I'm glad
Thank you so
you could
much.
resonate. But yeah, about this like female sarpanch with migrant husbands, like that's interesting, right? I've actually not encountered too many, at least in Bihar. So I don't know if that's like, the setting. A lot of them, I haven't truly met too many with like migrant husbands.
I can give you the context of this baby. And the
Okay.
other woman I was talking about, her name is Krishna Vini.
Okay.
There is a fantastic article in Behan Box
Okay.
on her.
Yeah.
She's a Dalit Panchayat leader. She was
Wow. Yeah.
stabbed by men because she wanted a toilet. So there was a story it is written.
Right.
And when I met her, she told my husband is always away.
Yeah.
Like, he has a business. So he's always away. And husband also told, like, because I'm always away,
Yeah.
she wanted to do something and I would let her.
Yeah.
And maybe the social exposure for the husband
Right.
may in turn help
Yeah,
her.
what Gemma
to
was
become-
suggesting with a liberal attitude.
But the
Yeah.
other thing I also felt like you said that social exposure leads to political
Sure. Yeah.
engagement
Yeah.
than economic exposure, which I'm like, because for me, like I'm economically empowered.
Yeah.
I'm not socially empowered to come out, whatever.
Yeah, so the point is not that it leads to it than economic, it's more like in the absence of it. So it can be that you are economically empowered, you're socially empowered, and you're politically empowered. But I'm saying that perhaps the channel might need not always be through economic empowerment. I'm saying that this social empowerment can also lead to that. It's not like I'm comparing. Yeah, I'm just saying if you don't press this button of like economic empowerment, if you have social empowerment, it can still lead to like this form of political. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thanks so much for your comments and engaging with it. Yeah, happy Diwali. Yeah.
Like yesterday we have, today we have, tomorrow we have.
Yeah.
Like every weekend is.
Yeah.
See you.
See ya, thanks.
Thank you.
Questions? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I think I had a very similar comment on just the autonomy, that is the autonomy changing anything materially or substantially for the woman herself? Like, because getting a car done for the child or getting a sewage canal dug is like things that's giving household utilities. That anything that she is deriving it. Is there any scheme or any claim making where she is directly a benefactor? Or could it be, if you have enough sample, can you check for like differences in anything done for the boy versus the girl, like the son versus the daughter? Because of spillovers in children, like Nancy Chan's work has like policy change at the top, spillover effects for children's education, so stuff like that could be interesting. Second aspect is norms are not just own norms, but also perceived social norms of other people around you. So maybe in a village where a higher proportion of men are migrating, it's normatively okay. Social norms are okay for a woman to go out and make things or anything to engage in political activity. So maybe there's variation in the saturation of migration at the village level, and that's a variation you can exploit to build another mechanism, like social norms changing, perceived second order beliefs changing. And then the other thing would be a heterogeneity in like, for the woman it's herself. If she's a freshly married woman and she's like is new to the village, does that have any effect differentially over and above like having a migrant husband versus not? And I think if you do men's survey, that would be very interesting. And if you do migrant men's wives look similar to non-migrant men? Like, is it a substitute? Like, is there like a substitution happening? And how do men's views about their own social norms and so second order beliefs, first order beliefs and second order beliefs change when they migrate and return, or when they've never migrated?
Yeah. So how do their beliefs change, like migrant or not?
Their beliefs about other people. So
migrant husbands.
Yes. Okay. Second order beliefs about other men in the community, other migrant men in the community. I don't know what the correct reference group should be. But maybe that.
Yeah.
Can I ask the question about your first question?
Yes.
So the emphasis on that question was whether she's doing something for herself as opposed to something for her children.
Or household.
Huh?
Or household.
Or household.
Yeah. And for children, I think.
And then you said within children, something for the
Boy and girl.
how is the mother now, father is away, the mother, when she steps forward, is she doing it more for the girl or the boy? I think it's a terrific question. I have no idea what to, but I am reminded of one of the great studies done on by public health. In fact, Lincoln Chen made his career out of this. Lincoln, Marty is speaking next week or in 2 weeks. But Lincoln's, do you remember that study? Or it's probably in the 70s or so somewhere. And as a public health researcher, he was trying to figure out why women's life expectancy, why women live less long in South Asia than elsewhere in the world. Women tend to live longer in America and Europe than men. This is true. Yeah. So why is this untrue in South Asia? So the study was organized around the following. As a doctor and a public health PhD, he thought that perhaps how children, girls and boys, are treated differentially in their early ages. So you can set it at 7 or 8 or 5 or 6, but whichever, according to your epidemiological understanding, what would last very long, what effect would last very long. So his conclusion was that mothers in South Asia call the doctor for the girl 48 to 72 hours later than when they call the doctor for the boy, holding age, cohort constant. And that makes up, so the boy sneezes and the doctor is called or taken to the doctor. And the girl has to have 103 fever before mother takes this. This was a very disturbing study, but Lincoln Chen's career, Lincoln is still, I think, he's Professor Emeritus here in the School of Public Health and connected to Mittal Institute. This was the conclusion. You are actually pointing in this direction, not exactly that mothers would take less good care of girls and better care of boys. You're not saying, but you're saying, please explore. You're saying, please explore.
Yeah, and I think my motivation was Nancy Chian's job market paper, which is based in China, where she compares women working in tea plantations versus, I think, something else. And one of them gave women more agency because it was a female-dominated plantation. And so the increased agency, her was economic agency, led to equal investment in both children, but equal investment meant that girls were actually had more investments and the treatment group girls' education outcomes moved.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, just like on that point that you raised, I think there's some scholarship that particularly looks at like child outcomes, like in China, I think, on migration. I cannot tell you if it's at the top of my head, I don't know which way it goes. So yeah, there's stuff that's looked at.
No, which way it goes.
Huh? Which way, as in the sense of like
both in China and India, boys are more important.
Yeah, but I don't know whether the study like just reestablishes that or there's differences.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So I cannot tell like what exactly they're finding. So to your point on like, are women, doing anything for themselves? I think that's an important like question. So I think one of the things we might think that women are maybe doing for themselves is like they're in charge of like doing all the, cooking, labor, all of that. So in the sense like maybe demanding for like cooking gas because is something that they're doing for themselves. And even toilets, women are the ones who, suffer the most when it comes to like, open defecation. So I think like that could be considered. But I think overall, women are thinking of themselves, but I think they're also thinking generally of what's around them, which tends to improve their own lives, right? Like at the top of this presentation at the start, I said that this woman asked about roads because she's the one going to do grocery shopping and she thinks that she deserves better. So in that sense, they might be asking for things that they think, will improve their well-being. So that's also a little bit about thinking for themselves. About sons versus daughters, I really don't know. So I cannot quite say. And also, like, is there a way you think that it might differ for sons versus daughters? Like, is there something specific you're thinking of? Like, it could be maybe they, when they ask for help, right? Like sometimes they ask for monetary help, like when it comes to like these kind of unfortunate like health issues. Is it for more? Does it happen more for like when it's the son versus the daughter? That could be something. I don't know. Yeah, so these are things to like
could use DHS data for this because it
Yeah.
has information about the entire family, about the
Yeah.
health condition, about
Yeah.
nutrition, education.
Yeah.
Any difference could be related
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah. The other thing was, so I'm just going to summarize the point. So it was about norms and basically how are the norms, like perhaps they are different in places where there's more migration versus where there's not. So there's obviously that would maybe have an effect on institutions and how welcoming they are to like women and them coming and engaging with the state. So there's an analysis that I do where I basically like drop some of these like high migration states in a way to like get at that, to get at the heterogeneity, to see if like, it's actually this result is just driven by the fact that a lot of this migration, respondents who are like migrants, like, or have migrant husbands are coming from like this high saturation of migration place. But I find like similar results even when you drop these high migration places like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, all of this. So that like kind of gets at it. But I do think that there might be like different effects in the extent to which they are. I mean I can bring up that slide, but yeah, so that's like the analysis I kind of do on that. Happy to show you. Yeah, can I
So it's here.
oh. Let's see. Dropping high migration, if you go to the first column right at the bottom. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the second one. Yeah, removing high migration, it actually seems to be that the gap between, migrant and non-migrant households, women, is actually bigger. So the effect sizes seem to be a bit bigger with respect to political engagement. So, and decision making. So this is removing Bihar, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Wait, did you finish?
I think I just have one point, which I think I can address about like the freshly versus, yeah.
Newly
married. So, I mean, so in my own survey, like what I did was I particularly did not want to have women who were newly married, in the sense of like, women get married technically at 18, but like sometimes they get married earlier, remain at home and then move to their in-laws house. So I like purposefully like started my survey with like, the youngest woman was like 24 or 25 years old, which that, I mean, might seem pretty young, but like women are generally married a couple of years by then in these contexts. So it was between women who are between ages 24 and 40. So that way I was eliminating any kind of, things that might come up, because I mean, women do become mothers-in-law by then. I've met a lot of mothers-in-law who are under 40, but fewer, right? Like, so it's still like within a certain, age range. I'm able to like unnecessarily other issues that might come up with like hierarchy, I'm able to like, eliminate. So that's how
Any sense of when women get married in Bihar?
I think it's pretty
16, 17, 18?
Yeah. I mean, they'll tell you, it's 18.
So that's why you would be a grandma.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
37,
And because you're having kids
Because
so soon,
Right,
and then
you have
they are getting married soon. Yeah. So I met someone, yeah, who's like 37. I told her my age, she was shocked. Yeah. And also not, I mean, at that time I was not married, but like even more shocked. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. I found this really fascinating. And I feel like a lot of the questions are also like in the book project territory.
Yeah. Happy to
But
hear them.
so I guess the first question is a bit more general, which is you motivate the talk with set of questions, a set of, statements about internal migration, but then the theory actually is technically potentially applicable to international migration, right? And this, I thought about this when Ashu was bringing up Kerala, where people are migrating to the Gulf. In theory, like the entire process can play out and actually would potentially be more they leave for a longer time, maybe they come back less often. So there should be that, those may be places where you see this even more, unless perhaps as Ashu was sort of alluding to, there could be some social norms coming if this is Gulf migration that could restrict that. But I wonder if, as you think through the book project, like I do think the case of internal migration that you're looking at is crucial, and this choice of Bihar, it's obviously clear that that's selected because it's a key corridor for internal migration. But I wonder if when you write the theory, it's a bit more general about any form of migration, whether it's internal or sort of outside country. And this also related to Gemma's point that she mentioned earlier about the sort of set of countries in South Asia where people migrate. So some of these other countries, a lot of the migration is actually outside of the country. And so I wonder if, I just think it's a more broader phenomenon even than, I mean, it's already a broad phenomenon, but I think it's even broader. I had just two points that I think could be interesting to think about. One is, I found the findings on the political knowledge very interesting. This lack of knowing the chief, no effects on knowing the chief minister, but effects on knowing the ration card details. And I mean, I don't know what this says about like, the expansion of like hyper localized knowledge or knowledge of like a procedure of something or not intricate knowledges of getting something versus like general political knowledge, which a lot of the general literature tends to focus on. And so, and this relates to my third point, which is a little bit about like, I know this is not a story about party politics and I hate to bring it in, but I think it's the electoral nature of it, maybe this is just me, is quite fascinating, right? You have a bunch of men who have migrated out. They typically actually are still registered in these locations and could potentially come back to vote during election time. The parties would want them to do that. But so the parties are sort of, but the parties recognize that the person who's going to be able to tell them who did things in the area for the past 5 years is actually the woman. So there is actually a little bit of an incentive on the part of a candidate or a politician to engage women perhaps more, given that they're the ones who now have the knowledge of how things have been going in the area, and they're also probably the one who can tell the man or suggest that they maybe come back in order to vote. And so I wonder if there are like, I mean, maybe this is part of how you're thinking about the book, but I wonder if there's like these like bigger consequences for, political, like for elections, for party building, and for how parties engage women. I mean, we've seen a drastic rise in how parties have been engaging women, all sorts of parties on a set of issues. And I think this potentially, the implications of this suggest that we should continue to see more.
Yeah, no, thanks for these questions. So to your point about, the how related it can be and how much we can extend to international migration, I think, essentially, they are, ostensibly similar in many ways in that it's obviously a male absence, and perhaps the dosage of male absence is like significantly more in international migration, which might lead to some difference in the effects. And I hope, I hope I do discuss this in the book, and I think it's important, generally if I'm talking about migration, there has to be a discussion on this. One of the things that I feel like, the ways in which the pathway from international migration to political engagement of women might differ is, I feel like the role of remittances and income and the financial channel, I think that might be a little more significant, because like internal migration is a different situation in that, you were mentioning that a lot of them, it's about like, if you don't migrate, you are going to starve, right? Like, so there's like no jobs. So people are migrating, and the amount you're contributing to the household is not going to be that, that much significant, and like,
you can't make a mosque.
Exactly, you can't make a mosque out of it. It's more about like, okay, I need to, I'm providing for my children to go to like, schools and like things like that. And I have actually seen like, some households. I met someone who was married to a man who was a migrant to Japan. From Bihar to Japan, this person has gone. Yeah, and like you can clearly see the difference also. The house is bigger. And like there's like a little, so I think it just might be a little different, but not to say it will not happen. But so I don't know how much I can just immediately apply to the international context, but it's an interesting thing to study. nevertheless.
In one chapter, you can say, or
Yeah.
at least half a section you
Right.
can say, one
Yeah.
section you can say,
Yeah.
the international migration is likely to provide more resources.
Yeah. And that can
To
have,
the sending communities.
Yeah.
So that they can think of making mosques and,
Right. Yeah.
and set up a bit dharamshala,
Yeah.
etc.
Or check out, right? Like we can
Yeah.
just check out if that's a lot of stuff in Latin America seems to suggest that about like
Yeah.
collective action among migrant households.
So
Yeah.
the level of income you're talking about here is very different.
Yeah,
So-
right. That's why I'm not seeing that effect on the income, I do look at household income and I don't see a significant like surplus among these
The bus ticket
households.
example, therefore.
Yeah,
very
it
good.
kind of is similar, like to that extent. So your second point was about like political knowledge of this kind of like knowing your, chief minister versus ration card knowledge, and you were talking about the value of each. Is now, am I?
Yeah, I'm trying to just think through like what is it that they're actually expanding knowledge on?
Yeah.
And then in relation to that, like what does that mean for how parties actually like engage or don't engage women, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think that, when you think of, it does look like, as I showed, that this form of political information and like who's your CM, all of those things, they don't seem to budge, like depending on who your husband is, whether it's a migrant or not. And what seems to be budging is this stuff, which kind of, I think makes sense because this is what matters to their life. And, I think it makes sense that they're like, having to do this, and therefore they know how to maneuver to some extent. They know how to maneuver the state. There are obviously challenges that women face that men might not, in like, they're turned away more than men and stuff like that. But I think the value of, say, having this knowledge, I think the point I was also trying to make here was that, it's not just that a China you need like, the photograph of the family for a ration card. Like that's not the point. The point is also that the way in which this woman is getting that knowledge is speaking to some skills that she's having to develop in obtaining that, right? Like she's going to have to talk to people, and that's like a huge thing for someone who's saying, I don't step outside like the main door. So I think that's where the value of it comes. It's not just knowing that additional document, it's like what that signifies. And to your point on like, how are parties, and I think that's kind of, I'm hoping that will be a chapter in the book. And that's because it makes sense. I mean, like, because I'm saying restrictions happen, women are engaging. Okay, but what? Like, how are parties? Like, that's the next part in the causa pathway. So, so that's something that I'm, hoping to explore in this, when I write the book, hopefully. I don't know if it'll become a paper or whatever. So it's something that I'm still like thinking through. And one thing, that did come up was that a lot of these men seem to come back for local elections, the village level elections. They are like coming back to vote sometimes, like depending on where you're at. Like I had done some field work in Rajasthan where they said that they had actually sent buses to Gujarat and like got men like come back for like the election. So it depends, like village level. Yes, it's like so competitive. Yeah, you're spending, I asked one man, he told me crores are being spent
To bring people back.
on these elections. That's the
level or village level?
village level.
Village level.
That's what you're dealing with. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
In Rajasthan.
Yeah, in Bihar, and like, so it's like crazy competitive. Like people are, so you're having to, and it's like pretty, so these men are being brought back. So that's an interesting thing. But like, I do know from talking to a lot of these representatives that they recognize, it's pretty obvious, like at that high level, that women are around. Like that's pretty much, a thing that they recognize. And there might be differences in how they help out these women, in the hope that, women are the ones around. Like they sometimes ask them to call men back, to bring them back. And like, so they might try to woo these women in some ways. So it's something that I'm like hoping I can explore. Yeah, good point, Rachel. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
And especially like how these ideas get developed in the first place, about the roles in the household. Is it something about the husband takes on these specific roles, the wife takes on a specific role, and you see differences among unmarried women, right? That they might start out with a different set of beliefs, and then once they get into this institution of marriage, like that's really where we see changes. The other point I had was about framing. So the way you started the presentation was about migration and the ways that we haven't looked at migration and some of its effects that it could have. I found it actually quite bigger. Like I would frame it more about political participation, especially for women, because I think that migration is kind of one way into tapping like the larger story about marriage or about gender norms or whatever you use as your main hook. But I think like the political participation of it seems really big to start there and then talk about like this effect of migration. I initially had the same question as Gemma about kind of the norms and the change in mindset. So I was wondering if you could share with us like any details from your interviews and fieldwork, because I know you did like quite extensive fieldwork. So I was curious too, like, is this about performing a task for survival, or, you know, is this something like I'm actually becoming empowered as you were talking about? Like the interesting quote to me was when the one respondent said, "Women become the husband." I found that really rich. So were you hearing more people saying like, well, I just have to, you know, like step into these shoes kind of temporarily because he's gone, or like I should do these things. I become empowered myself. Like I see that these are like tasks that I should play in the community. And this is more of an outstanding question for, I don't know if it's a problem for your argument if you don't show persuasion, because I still think like it's a powerful argument about gatekeeping on its own if you put this out as a publication. And I think the way that I was thinking of it is like, if you do agree, like marriage is a factor here, like I think you're showing an institution that blocks participation. And marriage is like one institution is part of this political dynamic.
Yeah. So to your point on like, if it's what if this is about like marriage and like, you know, what's happening in
more societal norms about women, like
yeah. So I think generally I think it's understood that women, when they are unmarried, I think they do have freedoms which tend to be a little more than they would if they were, you know, if you're married. I think that just seems to be a norm. Like even if a woman has a daughter, like she can like send her out. How much freedom that girl has versus her brother obviously would be less, but it's not kind of looked down upon or like, you know, prevented. I mean, in many ways, right? And especially if you compare her to like a woman who's married, there is a significant amount of, I think, like freedoms that women enjoy when they're unmarried. But and when it comes to, I think generally like the way, you know, here a lot of the institution of marriage and like what happens in these families is like guided by the overarching like norms of patriarchy, patriarchality, you know, patrilineal norms, where like it's all about like the husband's family. You're moving to your husband's family. It's not like a nuclear family. So that's patriarchality, lineal in the sense that it's the, you know, money, whatever, inheritance is like it goes down like the husbands, like, or the sons, right? So a lot of that is shaping what is happening. And these are like, you know, ages old, like phenomena, I mean, norms that do exist. So that is definitely kind of shaping how households like function in these places. And second, to your point on like, you know, I think I'm going to get to this thing about like how women are thinking of themselves. I think one of the things that I'm trying to say in this project is also that, which is why I'm refraining from calling it empowerment itself, is that a lot of women will couch this themselves in like, you know, they'll couch it as like, yes, we're doing it because someone's not there, or like, you know, it's okay for us to do it, you know, not just themselves, like they've already internalized that. And also like others around them seem to see it as acceptable because, okay, the husband's not here, so it's going to happen. So it doesn't like come from, it hasn't so far, I'm suggesting, led to that kind of complete shift in norms, or like it's not been norm bending or upending. because women haven't internalized the fact that they should be where they are. So that's why I'm kind of, refraining from calling it like empowerment. And your question on like, so you had a question on like, what was it that you were, it was about like what happens when men return or something like that. I think that's kind of related to the point.
But then Gemma
Yeah,
suggested,
okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so I think these attitudes, I mean, I have to say, like, I spoke to some migrant men and they kind of recognize what women are doing, like for the household, like for them. And they like recognize how much they're doing and like it's changing attitudes towards women in some ways. Maybe the change is not that dramatic and that it has to still be couched in this idea that they're allowed to be there because, husbands are not around. But I think that migrant men like do observe it and appreciate what women have done and even tell me that she knows more. Like, there was one person who said that women even know like the name of their like block development officer who's like a local, bureaucrat. And if you ask men, they don't even know all that. Like, so it's kind of being recognized what these women are able to kind of know. But it's not completely, like I'm refraining still from saying that it's complete shift in norms and norm change and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I think that's valuable.
Yeah.
Still, like this
Yeah.
gatekeeper function that you've identified.
Yeah.
Is actually really valuable.
Yeah.
Despite like if there's not a
Right.
normative
Yeah.
change
It's
in
a
their
small
life, still
change,
will
but yeah.
participate.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm a chemistry postdoc. So
Oh, okay.
Yeah, very good. You guys.
Be good to hear your perspective.
So I'm from Assam.
Yeah.
So I'm only interested in one point that you talked about political engagement of the women.
Yeah.
So suppose these data are studied in a sample size or sample area where it's coming from, where the urban to rural ratio is bigger. So do you think that's gonna change the political, their impression of politics? If this is coming from those kind of area rather than Bihar, where most of the people are in rural area. Of course, the migrant ratio is coming mostly from the rural area to Mumbai or other places.
Sure.
Suppose it is studied in Punjab, or where most of the migrants are international migrants nowadays, or in Gujarat. So do you think that's actually changes, ability to take their decision in politics for the women?
So you're saying, like this context, migration is happening from a rural area versus where,
Seems like if this
right,
is
yeah.
Bihar, so I can understand,
Right. So versus where it were happening from an urban area, is that what you're?
where
Yeah.
the ratio is bigger. Suppose this is studied in, Gujarat or
Yeah.
Punjab, where the ratio is much bigger because most of the large amount of migration happening from the, wealthy,
Sure.
people also.
Yeah.
So do you think that also changes when the man leaves from their household, compared to something from Bihar?
So you're saying if the socioeconomic profile of the household
Yes.
that's sending the migrant and the kind of migrant that they're sending, like if that will,
Yes,
that will
affect
change,
the way they
yeah.
decision in politics.
I think it would change. Like, I think I have a slide here where I look at different types of migrants, right? Like I have skilled versus unskilled. I know it doesn't go exactly to your point, but like if we were to look at a place where it's happening from more like wealthy-ish place, you would see that they're more likely to maybe go for like skilled labor or like go to like a corporate, like another, that kind of white collar work. I don't know how much. I think there would be a change in certain types of engagement. I don't know if they would necessarily go to their, representative for like welfare services. Maybe it'll be more like more of an increase in like civic participation of different types. Yeah, that's what I think. Sorry, the difference would come in. Yeah, because it would, their socioeconomic profile might kind of alter the extent to which or what kind of engagement does occur. Yeah.
There's one more kind which you may want to consider as you get towards the book.
Yeah.
This is very important in, so I've done quite a bit of work outside India. Most of my work has been in Southeast Asia. And in Indonesia, and especially in Malaysia, there is a type of migrant who leaves the village in the morning, comes back home at night.
The migrants, yeah.
So he just goes to the city, does his work and comes back home.
Yeah.
Now, this, of course, the daytime, a lot of work has to be done in the daytime.
Right.
And he's not there.
Yeah.
However, he's back every night.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about roads, and the roads are so good that this can be done.
Yeah.
The bus takes you there in an
Right.
hour and brings you back in an hour. So you leave at whatever, 8,
Yeah.
9 a.m., 10 a.m. These places start not at 9, but
Yeah.
10. And you're done at 5 and you come back at 6:37. Right?
Yeah.
And so you do it at least some of these places have 5 days, some of these have 6. So you do that, and it should have some implication of women's agency too, because daytime you're not there.
Right. Yeah,
and so if you look at some of those studies, there should be plenty in Malaysia, but you just for your one chapter somewhere, one section somewhere, that this is a very different kind of migration. These people are away for a month or 2 months or 3 months, right?
Yeah, they are away. But there are day migrants too in the context. Yeah, there are international migrants, day migrants, and the migrants that I'm looking at. So it'll be, it would, I think the only difference would be like, if they need their husband's help, like maybe they don't have to, they can just ask them, and maybe they can take a day off if that's possible, if they can afford it, to like help them out. Otherwise, there is still the absence during the day, during official working hours, which might still make women have to do these things. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't specifically look at that group of migrants.
Is it large scale? That something like day migrants, what you call day migrants?
I don't actually, I mean, I've encountered couple, so I don't know the exact extent if it dominates or is a minority. I cannot tell right now.
Daily back and forth, there is of course a very gruesome story.
Yeah.
So that gruesome story is from apartheid South Africa, where they would leave the village at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to get to work at 9.
Yeah.
And then leave at 6 p.m. get home at 10.
Yeah.
And this was done daily because Black people could not be in cities. And they of course, the literary dimensions of that are very well brought out in so many works.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's enough social science of that.
Right.
But this is not particularly relevant here. It just makes your book is going to be it's going to show the world that you've considered all kinds of ways,
that's a good point.
that are maybe auxiliary, subsidiary, but
and whether or not they have different.
You know that this was something like this happened in South Africa. It took a very gruesome form.
Yeah.
And the book by one of the most well-known books is Move Your Shadow.
Okay.
You might want to check it out.
Okay.
There are on the chapter on busing is absolutely moving and heartbreaking. There's a whole chapter in that book, Move Your Shadow. I remember, I'm forgetting it. Well, the guy who wrote it became finally the editor of New York Times, and also had a book on Gandhi. Well, he spent his reporting career was spent in India and South Africa.
Okay.
And then he came back to New York, etc.
Yeah.
So it might be just just show off a little.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rithika. Thank you so much, Gemma. And this was really excellent. And we're gonna.
But it's not only Bihar. This is larger. She's right.
Yeah.
There's a larger, not only about migration.
Sure.
But surely even on migration, this could be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
And you could certainly ask Gemma what was happening in southern Italy while in the 50s, 60s, while the men were going up north.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were also happy that they were migrating.
Thank you.
Thanks.